Welcome everyone to our first look at the WATA Super Nintendo Population Report. Just like I did with the NES Pop Report, and just like I'm going to do with every other Pop Report, I got some overview level stuff I want to go over with you guys, and then we'll look at some of the numbers of the actual games on the Pop Report. What's common, what's uncommon, what's surprising, and what's not surprising. If you like these types of videos, make sure to hit the like button, help it spread to more people, and let's get into this. So the first thing I want to say is we have 588 unique entries on the Super Nintendo Pop Report. That leaves about 130 Super Nintendo games that have never been graded by WATA still. That is a lot. Remember, on the NES Pop Report, we had 12 games that still aren't graded. On Super Nintendo, we have around 130. That's insane. That was the first surprise for me. I expected there to be at least one copy of most of the random games by now sent into WATA, but I guess we still have a long way to go on that part. Which brings me to the next stat, which is that only 4,605 Super Nintendo games have been graded total. That is 44.6% of the total number of NES games that have been graded, which is over 10,000 at this point. Again, that's a little bit surprising to me. I thought the numbers would be closer. I have heard some people say anecdotally that finding sealed Super Nintendo in general is harder than finding sealed NES in general. Perhaps that's part of the reason why we see such a big disparity on the Pop Report here, or maybe it's just going to take more time for Super Nintendo to catch up because NES was the system making all the headlines. People were focusing on that the most heavily, so it could just be that we need more time for Super Nintendo to flesh itself out more. On the report, there are 4 games that have a perfect 10 on Super Nintendo. They are Clay Fighter, Judgment Clay, Balls 3D, F-Zero, Player's Choice version, of course, and Rap Jam Volume 1, which interestingly, we just saw Rap Jam Volume 1, the 10.0 grade, sell on Heritage Auctions for about $14,000, which is absolutely insane to me. That's crazy. But I guess that's the price someone is willing to pay to simply have a game in WATA 10.0 grade. As you know, it's basically impossible to get the 10, so someone was willing to pay for it. And now let's talk about the actual grade distribution of the Super Nintendo games, which is on this nice little color chart here. This first row is the distribution of grade on Super Nintendo. The second row is how it compares to the distribution on the NES games. So looking at it, you can see that on the Super Nintendo Pop Report, most of the grades are concentrated from the 8.5 to the 9.6 level. These grades actually comprise almost 69% of all Super Nintendo games that have been graded thus far. Just like with NES, the most common grade so far is the 9.4, comprising 20% of all submissions. Unlike NES though, there's actually 2% less 9.6s floating around, perhaps indicating that it's a bit harder to get a 9.6 on Super Nintendo, or maybe there are just less factory fresh copies of Super Nintendo games floating around compared to NES. The other big statistical difference here is that there's much more representation down at the 7.5 level for Super Nintendo games than there are for NES. And this might just be a function of there being a lot less Super Nintendo games submitted in general compared to NES, but you'd also think that if there's a less number being submitted in general, that it should only be the highest grades of games being submitted. And that's why I personally find it interesting that there is such a high amount of representation down at the 7.5 level. And the other interesting thing to note, and I thought that maybe this was just going to be a random occurrence with NES consoles, but it looks like Super Nintendo is the exact same way, where the 8.5 and the 9.2 are much more likely to happen than the 9.0. And that just seems really weird to me. Like, obviously the 9 is the perceptual barrier for a lot of people. That is the investment barrier. They want at least the 9.0 grade. And apparently WATA is also aware of this to some degree, and when choosing to give a game a 9 or not, it seems like a lot of games are going to teeter right between this 8.5 and 9 level. And even then, if it looks like it's nice enough for a 9, they might just give it a 9 too. I'm really curious to see if we're going to see this same pattern hold when we get to the N64 and Game Boy games. Here's what the grade distribution looks like on a nice little chart for you to see. This chart actually looks almost identical to the NES chart. And the weighted average game for Super Nintendo at this time is an 8.79, which is a little bit lower than the NES average at 8.89. Kind of interesting, but not that statistically relevant, given how close it really is. So let's go over to the actual population report and talk about some of the games we see here. And make sure when you're going through the population report, if you look at F-Zero and you see 231, that you click on the little plus thing here, and then you can see how many copies are Player's Choice versus standard print games. I was watching some guys do an analysis the other day, and they were just talking about the absolute populations, like, oh, F-Zero has 231 copies, and look how much it sells for on Heritage Auctions, while citing sales for Black Label copies, but combining the total population of Player's Choice and standard copies. It's a lot different if I tell you there's 231 copies of F-Zero on Super Nintendo, but only 38 of them are actually Black Label copies. 193 of those are Player's Choice. If you're looking at the Pop reports, make sure to open up the tabs and actually look at the different variants. It matters a ton. So anyways, F-Zero is the highest Super Nintendo game graded. This should surprise no one. Player's Choice copies, 193 of them. It's like one of a few factory sealed games where I would say Player's Choice F-Zero is common. You're basically more likely to find a factory sealed copy of this than a complete in box one, which is just crazy. Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, 135 is the second one, but again, if we actually open it up, you can see that the standard black label copies, there's only 60 of them. So again, a lot of Player's Choice makes up the population report here. And that's going to happen with a lot of these consoles like Super Nintendo, N64. We're probably going to see it with GameCube, where Player's Choice Greatest Hits copies are going to take up a lot of the population report, which is going to make the overall number for that title high. Street Fighter 2 might actually surprise some people. 121 copies, 107 of them are the Made in Japan first print. If you watch my live auction streams, I've talked about Street Fighter 2 a lot because there are a lot of them out there. This game was available in case packs for a very long time. You can see just how high the distribution here of 9.4, 9.6, and 9.8 there are. And remember that not all games are created equal. Street Fighter 2 will always have a ton of demand. So even though there are 107 copies, even though Street Fighter 2 is a more common game on Super Nintendo to find factory sealed, it's also going to be a game with a ton of demand. Do not think that just because something has a higher population count or a little bit lower of inherent rarity, that means that it inevitably has to be a less expensive video game. When numbers are this low to begin with, 107 copies to go around total at this time, demand is going to matter way more when it decides what kind of prices these games are going to go for. Coming down again, we have Super Star Wars, another game where there's 101 on the population, but there's only 12 first prints. Kind of crazy. Super Mario Kart, again, there's 90 of them, but there's only 26 of the actual first prints. Super Mario World, this is one where I was actually surprised by just how many there are. 84 total there, 50 of them are Player's Choice, but we still have 34 black label copies of Super Mario World. Not that 34 is a ton, but I was expecting somewhere closer to 20 myself. Kind of interesting with Super Mario World though, you can see that there's only 196 and 098s. So with Super Mario World, even if you get yourself a 94 or 96 copy, you have an absolute gem. It's insane that there's no 98s out there. I really would like to see the VGA pop report to see how many 95s are floating around out there. Is it even possible to get a 98 with the known population right now? Such a popular game, and we still don't have a perfect copy that has unearthed itself. Donkey Kong Country 2, Killer Instinct. The highest graded games are going to be many of the most popular games on the system because those are the games that people want to send out for grading. Those are the games that are selling for the highest amounts currently. So those are the ones that are going to be highest represented on the WATA Pop Report. Super Castlevania 4 is sitting right here. The Majesco print has 34. Standard print only has 9. Jesus. Again, no 9.8 exists on that one either. There are going to be a ton of random games on this pop report that are going to have very little representation, and it's super hard at this time to say if that game is actually really rare or if that game is just one that no one cares about. If you've been collecting Super Nintendo for a long time, you probably have a good gauge of where certain games fall, but I am not a Super Nintendo expert specifically. I don't know the nuances of random sealed games. I can't tell you if Q*bert 3 sitting at 4 population is rarer than Plock sitting at 4 population. Does that mean that Q*bert and Plock are as rare as Pocky and Pocky and Rocky 2, all sitting here at 4 population? We also have Mega Man 7 and Mega Man Soccer, also sitting at 4 population. So many of these rare and sought after Super Nintendo games are sitting at pitifully low population counts. That was something that was pretty surprising to me. Of the Super Nintendo games that have above 10 on the population count, you can see here, I'm just going to scroll down the screen a little bit. There's about 50 to 60 games with over 10. And then immediately we are met with the 9s. Of course, there's ones out there in VGA cases. There are raw ones out there. But still, I thought there was going to be a little bit more. Here's Sunset Riders sitting at 7 on the population count, and none of them are higher than a 9.0. A game that seems to always be found in poor condition, even CIB, and apparently that holds true with sealed as well. Here's Wild Guns sitting at 3 on the population count. The highest one is a 9.2. Again, just another game impossible to find. And that's why I mentioned making the proper analysis. That doesn't mean that Bill Walsh College Football sitting at 2 is more more rare than Wild Guns, sitting at 3. The pop report is skewed towards the games that are most submitted at this time to WATA. That includes the most popular games and the rarest games. So if you know of a game that's rare, like Evo, the Search for Eden, and it still sits at a 2 population count, we can feel pretty confident that that's actually really freaking rare. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the Super Nintendo Pop Report. Are the numbers high to you? What stood out? What didn't stand out? What was low? If you're someone on the wow, sealed games are so darn common side, I don't know how you could look at this Super Nintendo Pop Report and feel like there's a lot of them to go around. As someone who would like to own a lot of these at some point in time, it's honestly disappointing. But let me know your thoughts down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this analysis video. N64 is coming next. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.